Hey, for a look at what's making news in print and online this morning, we're joined by research fellow at Deakin University and rural podcaster Kirsten Duprose. Good morning to you, Kirsten. Great to have you on the program again.
Thanks, Lisa. Good morning to you.
We've been chatting already this morning about these words from Philip Lowe yesterday that came about in this Senate Estimates Committee. Interesting how the different newspapers have decided to handle the thoughts about sharing.
Yes, look, I think it must be hard being the RBA governor. You know, Philip Lowe made these comments at a Senate Estimates hearing in Canberra yesterday, and he was really talking about the price mechanism rather than saying, you know, go get a flatmate to solve your problems or go, you know, live with mum and dad. But what he did have to say was really interesting and interesting commentary of where we're at with this rental supply crisis. You know, obviously rents are soaring and people are doing it really tough. And rental vacancies are so low at the moment, record lows. And we've also got strong population growth, which is something that he mentioned as well. And he was talking about how policy's not really keeping up with that population growth. So there's some longer term issues here. And Philip Lowe was certainly saying we need to look at increasing the housing supply, but that's not going to fix the problem in the short term. So that's kind of when he made these comments that in the short term, we've got higher interest rates, which will help alleviate some of those rental pressures by forcing people, and he said the word, to sort of economise on their housing. So yes, that might mean share housing, it might mean getting a boarder, or perhaps staying at home with mum and dad for a little bit longer than you expected. So that's what he was really talking about, is making sure more people live in dwellings, so that, you know, the pressures of the economy are forcing people to naturally do this. But yes, it's come across some papers as if he's making an order.
Yeah, I don't think that my reading of it was he wasn't saying this is what you should do. I think he was just kind of pointing out what people do when
These are the choices.
This is the reality that some people will be facing. We'll get to a couple of viewer comments about that in a little bit. First of all, before we do that, let's go to this interesting story on the front page of the Herald Sun this morning, Kirsten.
Yeah, look, there's a push for a new law that would require motorists in Victoria to keep their headlights on during the day, and that's in an effort to curb Victoria's, soaring road toll. And this past 7 days, has been a terrible time on Victoria's roads. So Nick McGowan, who's an Upper House Liberal MP, is making this push and says it follows countries like Canada that have this daytime running lights, and they make it mandatory. It's interesting because in the country, you know, a lot of us do put our headlights on during the day, you know, not those big ones, but the headlights on during the day anyway. I know when I first moved to the country, my husband said to me, one of the first things he said when I was on the road was, keep your lights on so that people can see you. And it's true, you know, you're on those long stretches of road, particularly on a dreary, overcast day, and you just can't see as well. And particularly if I find cars are darker in colour as well, it makes it harder. So it's also really interesting because about a month ago, Monash University published a study calling for daytime running lights to be activated when a car even has its main lights off. And look, certainly some of the new cars have this technology, but what Nick McGowan is calling for is to make it mandatory anyway, so that we don't have to wait for the sort of new cars and technology to catch up, that we should be doing it anyway. And look, it's interesting really that this is on the front page, because a story like this probably wouldn't make the front page. It's just that we've had some incredibly horrific and tragic accidents in Victoria, and one of which, you know, is in the area that I live, near Hamilton. So that happened on the weekend with those 4 young people who died, you know, 2 14-year-olds, a 15-year-old and a 31-year-old woman, and there's a 17-year-old girl who's still in hospital. And our community is absolutely in mourning, and our hearts go out to those families. I didn't know any of them personally. Town, you know, Hamilton's 10,000 people. You know people who know people. You're only one step away from that, and there are, you know, schools in grieving, and a lot of young kids at the moment who are dealing with the loss of their friends and the shock of such a horrible accident.
It definitely makes us pause and puts more weight into an idea like this. We've got to look at everything. Public education campaigns don't seem to be doing the job at the moment, so let's look at what technology, what changes we can make elsewhere. I want to wrap up with this story coming out of Bali, that they've got to the point where the governor has now released the do's and don'ts card. It would be so silly if it wasn't so serious.
Yeah, that's right. It's a sad state of affairs, really, isn't it? Where tourists have to get a card, a list of 12 things to do and not to do when you enter the country. And look, I have to say, it's not just targeted at Australians, it's all tourists. But there have been a wave of disrespectful tourists in Bali recently, which has really prompted this. There's been 130 deportations already this year. There was one case just recently of a German woman who interrupted a traditional dance. She was naked and interrupted this dance performance at a temple. And there's been quite a few cases of nudity and temples. So, the list now includes not to climb holy trees and not to pose naked at cultural or religious sites. There's also, don't behave disrespectfully at temples and not to wear immodest clothing on the don't list. So, look, this is coming in from June. All tourists will get this. And another part of this story is there's a don't, flout visa laws as well by starting a business or trading illegally, and that is somewhat linked to the war in Ukraine and Russia, where people are trying to avoid conscription, and some are coming to Asia and indeed Bali, and so that is probably a bit targeted to that specific problem. But yeah, we'll all get a card on how to behave when you next go to Bali from June.
Oh, well, hopefully number 10 on the do is have fun at least as well. It is still a beautiful place to visit. Hey, Kirsten, thanks very much for coming on.
Thanks, Lisa.